I understand practicality is huge for y'all, okay? And I'm trying to create things that are going to be practical for you to use. So Kyle did this last time. We were talking about trying to figure out where people are at on that process of conversion, right? Were they just barely trusting? Were they curious? Were they open? Were they actually seeking? Or were they an intentional disciple? Right now, I'm going to tell you, that doesn't matter because most of the kids in these scenarios are in that first three categories. They're either lacking trust, they're curious, or they're open, but they haven't sold themselves out for Jesus yet, okay? They have doubts, right? Okay, so let's go with this kid. Okay, kid number one, this is a fictitious person, but it's a real scenario, and I do want to point out, Kyle and I were able to use AI to produce this, and we reviewed everything, okay? That before I put it up here, I wanted to verify the content. But I just want to tell you, it's a useful tool in a lot of ways, okay? When you use it for the right reasons, but you have to give it oversight, okay? Just putting that out there, right? Okay, so Ethan's 16. He's Catholic. He attends his parish youth group and confirmation prep. He's bright, curious, loves math and science, recently joined his school science club, reads his blogs, and watches YouTube videos about physics, evolution, and astronomy. That's his thing, man. He's respectful but not afraid to ask hard questions. Feels like the church often avoids his concerns. No, it's not the church, but it's the person standing in front of him who represents the church to him and has not adequately formed themselves or has a resource in hand that will address what he is asking. Therefore, if he shows up to class and he asks that question, he doesn't get an answer, he thinks the church doesn't have one. God's mind is infinite. Our minds are finite. They have a beginning and an end. There is no question some finite mind can ask that an infinite mind has not revealed an answer for. And the church has those answers. Setting. During a confirmation prep session, the group discussion God as creator of all things. Ethan raises his hand. If the universe can be explained by the Big Bang, why do we even need God? Okay, you're in class, right? Your teacher just got asked that. That's a valid what? Because modern physics has shown that, 13.7 billion years ago, from an infinitely dense point in the finite past, time, space, and matter began to expand from one point. And that was the beginning of the expansion of the universe. Modern cosmology has shown that. But the universe can't explain why it is. It can only explain what it is. Now, I just jumped from physics to philosophy. So why is there something rather than nothing? All of your science jargon, and I can even take it further, without fine-tuning in the universe or entropy, you don't have quote-unquote Darwinian evolution, and that can be debunked too. So don't tell me evolution disproves what? God. Because without certain things in the universe being exactly the way they are, there'd be no life on this planet at all. So why is there life instead of no what? Life. Science can show how humans evolved. If evolution is true, then Genesis sounds like a fairy tale, right? If everything can be explained by natural law, doesn't that mean there's no higher power needed by the natural world? This is okay, so I want to point out something to you real quick. Isn't belief in God just filling in the gaps? The God of the gaps. Richard Dawkins, one of the four horsemen of the new atheism, he would use this argument. And when I got into the classroom, I already knew what these guys were proposing. I also knew how bad philosophers they were, and I knew how easy, because I know philosophy it is, to show how stupid they're what? The arguments are. But to kids who don't have any of that background, they think it's gospel. And if they're looking for a reason not to want to live a moral life, if they're looking for a reason not to want to be selfless, if they're looking for a reason to do everything opposite of what we're asking them or God is actually calling them to do, that they think is going to make them happy but really ends up making them completely miserable, they're looking for an excuse to reject the faith. Okay? Just to point out to you what he's doing here, right? He's exercising something called scientism. Scientism is not, it masquerades as science. It's not science. It's a philosophy. It's a worldview based on how you interpret what? Science. And Bishop Barron responds in a rebuttal, as you should too, that understanding of science is a reductionist view of the world. It's reducing the world to only one way of seeing the what? The world. And it's irrational. That means it's not really that logical because its own premise is a self-refuting argument, as I said earlier. Something that can only tell you about the natural world and what happens within things within the natural world, by its own definition, can't disprove something super what? Natural. By its own definition, it can't do that. Yet you're asserting that it can. You're asserting it can be X while being Y at the what? No, sorry. Bad what? Bad argument. Do you have another one? They're not waiting for that kind of what? Response. When you give it to them, what do they have to do? They have to wrestle with their own worldview. Is this actually what? True. Because I convinced myself it would. It was. And I could justify my beliefs, my behaviors, the way I approach living my what? My life on that false premise. Somebody proposed a premise to me to believe is true. Could I logically, in my own mind, look at the evidence for and what? Against it. If not, then I just subscribe to it because it makes me feel what? Good. Regardless of whether it's actually true or what? Or not. Your feelings don't make things right or what? Wrong. We know that as Catholics. And if we assent to the Catholic faith, we have to live by that. My feelings don't necessarily determine I'm right. Just because I have strong feelings about something means I can still be wrong about it. Okay? Contraception. Now, if you're dealing with Ethan, here's some productive ways to deal with Ethan. Here's some unproductive what? Ways to deal with Ethan. We also did these on AI. I thought it was a very useful tool. So this is what I gave you back, right? What kind of responses you're going to get. So just kind of showing you for the first one, then I'll kind of turn you loose on the next one, okay? And don't look at the papers. I want you to really talk about what would you, just before we even go, like, what would you have said to a kid if they told you that? You probably wouldn't have responded the way I would. Responded. Why? Because you're not used to having to deal with those kind of questions because that's not typically what the average CCD teacher is supposed to be teaching in a CCD class. But guess what? That's what the average kid coming into your CCD class now is asking questions about. So what does that mean? That means if we don't have resources, right, that address those questions, we're lacking what? Something. That we what? That we need. And if the kid perceives in that moment, even if you love them, even if you hurt them, even if they know they've been known, heard, and seen, that the one person that they have some value of trust with in the church, in that moment doesn't have some kind of, like you can even say, look, I don't know, but I'm going to go what? I'm going to go find out. And then, but do that, right? Afterward, go get something to meet that need and bring it back. They're gone. Because the guy on YouTube already got their attention when he walked out the door, and he had a bad argument, but his bad argument made a lot more sense than what they heard at CCD class. Okay, one catechist freezes, unsure how to respond. Another feels defensive. And when we're told that we're not doing something, or when it's pointed out to, look, it takes humility, right? When people point out to us in our own lives, places where we have inadequacies and we need to grow, we don't like that. But God does that on purpose because he's purifying us. Okay? And I didn't walk into a theology classroom equipped with all this stuff. I had to realize through mistakes, through things that I did trying to do evangelization, where they were good or they flopped, what the problem was. And I found out very quickly that a kid who has an intellectual obstacle to the faith, you can give the best witness talk on the planet. I think I have it with my son's story. And they can steal all that and walk back in a classroom and say, oh, that was just a coincidence. And it has zero impact on them what? At all. Did I meet that kid's need? No. And if I stay stuck in my cycle and say, but I'm reaching all these other kids, well, didn't Jesus say leave the 99 to go find the what? The one? Well, that kid's the one. Then I need to change what I'm doing. A third wants to engage but worries about saying something unorthodox. How would you affirm Ethan's courage to ask honest questions without shutting him down? What are ways you can show the harmony between science and faith rather than framing them as opposites, which is what Protestants do, which is why they're in error? Examples. They don't realize they're doing it, but if you ascribe to Protestant theology, that's what Protestant theology does. Okay? And critiquing a belief system is not critiquing the person who holds it. Make the distinction. That's philosophy. So I have a belief system as a Catholic. People critique it all the time. They may not be judging me personally, but they're thinking I'm crazy for conforming to that belief system. I got to provide evidence why I conform to it. If a Protestant believes in the Protestant theology and what its tenets are, its propositions for being true, I can critique that and not critique them as a person. But we've lost the ability, because we've lost grasp of reality, to separate critiquing an idea that we prescribe to and separating it from ourselves. We think if we are attacking the idea, we're attacking the person. Well, that's just bad philosophy. It's just bad logic. Okay? Science explains how, faith reveals why. Two different questions. So that's philosophical. Pope St. John Paul II addressed to the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, truth cannot contradict truth. That's what I said earlier, the law of non-contradiction. Something can't be something can't be X while being Y at the exact same time. It can't be the exact opposite of what it is in its nature at the same time, or it's false. The Catechism on Creation and Evolution is basically addressed in paragraph 283 to 284, and that's the 92 Catechism. And when I taught the cosmological argument, a lot of people are not aware of this. Father George Lemaitre was a Catholic priest. He challenged Albert Einstein's formula in the cosmological argument. So how is a Catholic priest accepting realities of physics and staying a Catholic priest if faith and science are in contradiction with one another? He got all the formation all the other priests did that we sit there and go receive Holy Communion from every man. Because there is no what? Contradiction between faith and what? Science. Otherwise, the priest himself would have had a conflict of conscience, right? Can't do that. Possible faith responses. Ethan, those are excellent questions. Science can really explain a lot about the universe. It can. But what it can't do is tell us why there is something rather than nothing. I addressed that earlier, or why natural law exists in the first place. Why is there order in nature? A design, a hierarchy of order in nature, which exists not only in non-rational beings, like a tree or a rock, or a dog, or a horse, but in rational beings, people. Catholics believe science and faith work together. Science helps us to understand the mechanics of the universe. In other words, how it works. And faith helps us discover the meaning and purpose we have in our life. So stop reading Genesis through the lens of Darwin. Read the Bible on its own terms. Nobody was thinking about evolution when they wrote Genesis. They were writing Genesis to explain why there's something rather than nothing, and how God created in his omnipotent power from absolutely nothing and brought something into what? Existence. That was the Jewish tenet, right? God created ex nihilo. He created from absolutely nothing. Therefore, everything he created, he sustained in and through himself. So his very essence is existence. And didn't he tell Moses that? Who do I tell him sent me? I am he who is to be. I am existence itself. Okay, that's how that's God's name. I am existence itself. Okay, there's a lot of correlation between those two things. Okay, let's go to the next scenario, right? Just going through these with you. Here's Maya, okay? What's one of the big tenets, okay? Faith and science don't contradict, they complement. Does God exist? We just addressed those two kind of in that first scenario. What's the third one? Why people leave the faith? Why does God allow suffering? Okay, we probably get that one a lot. Maybe you see this a lot in your parishes with kids, right? Okay, so Maya's 15. She's active in confirmation prep, youth group. Her grandmother recently passed away after a long illness. Maya and her family had been praying daily for healing, along with parish friends and youth group members. She's honest. She was just hurting. She's not hostile to the faith, but she feels betrayed by God because God didn't save her grandparents' life. I mean, I'm sure you run into kids with these kind of things. Yes, much so. Well, I was to say, adults is just being a kid on steroids. During a small group reflection of trusting God in difficult times, Maya speaks up in front of her entire catechist and peers and says, hey, why didn't God heal my grandma? When so many of us were praying, if God is good, why would he ever let her suffer so much? Now, oftentimes I find you can get philosophical responses to this, right? But some of the best ones, honestly, are people that have endured immense suffering and can give a witness about how that suffering that everybody perceived to be a burden actually became a blessing and transformed their life. That's a bet to me, like God responded not in word about suffering, but in deed on the what? On the cross. So sometimes word and deed are necessary. So when we give that testimony, that can be a really, really great answer to suffering. But we also sometimes need to also be able to give like philosophical answers for that, right? So if prayer doesn't change anything, what was the point of praying? I mean, these are logical what? Questions a kid would have, right? Doesn't suffering just prove there isn't God at all, or at least not one who cares? I mean, even Thomas, one of the greatest minds in the world, who baptized Aristotle, said that, the problem of evil is one of the strongest arguments against the existence of God. So we have to be real careful about how we address that. Even though I feel like, Jesus through the cross and redemptive suffering is the answer to evil. Okay? And we can give that in a personal witness. We can also give it from a philosophical standpoint. If the Bible says God answers prayers, why didn't he answer ours? Good question. So I'm sure you've heard this. Somebody said, yes, I heard it from adults too. So I'm giving you a scenario, right? I think this is really good. You can take this back with your catechist, right? And you can have them walk through a scenario and just talk about it. And then give them the handout I gave you and say, okay, let's talk about what did you hear, right? Amongst one another, how would you respond? Was this a good response? Would it be not a good response? How do you think the kids would react to this? So oversimplistic, God just wanted another angel in heaven. Dismissive. Okay, let me address that. Angels are a different species. Okay, you don't become an angel when you die. This drives me nuts online. Okay? Angels, their office, their nature is they're immaterial. You don't become an angel when you die. That's just bad theology and bad catechesis. Okay? We're human beings. We're a different species than angels. They're a higher what? Species than us in the order and hierarchy of creation that God created in heaven. They're infinitely smarter than us. That's why you don't name your guardian angel. They're smarter than you. They're not even there because they like you. They're there because they love God and they're assigned to you by God. Okay? I'm partially kidding. So, it's just, it drives me nuts. So you don't become an angel when you die, okay? Just point that out. We can't understand, so don't question it. Bad thing to say. Changing the subject to avoid raw emotions. The worst thing for somebody when they ask a question, this happens all the time, especially people who don't have one, they deflect by changing the what? The subject. If you've ever been in a debate, you'll see it. They'll do it all the time, okay? Okay. And they lose the argument the minute they would. They do that, okay? For anybody who's following what's happening. Okay, pastoral responses. I love these. Acknowledge the pain. Yes, this is hard. Life is what? It's hard. I mean, we got to acknowledge that, right? Because then they feel heard. It's okay to bring that hurt to God. That's a great response. Jesus did that on the way to the what? He did it on the cross. Father, why have you forsaken me? Affirm the question. If you're good at asking this, the Bible itself is full of people crying out, why, Lord? Even Jesus prayed in the garden, not my will, but yours be done. But if this cup could pass me by, right? Speak of the mystery with hope. We don't always know why God doesn't answer prayers the way we ask, but we do know he entered into our suffering through Jesus. He never abandons us. So Christ's suffering in his humanity, because he's hypostatically united to a divine nature, right? As a divine person, he brings meaning to suffering. And he calls us into it so we can experience everything he did in his humanity so we can become more like him. And I'm speaking from experience. And I'm sure all of you could do that too, from your own life. Prayer is more than asking for something. It's about a relationship. So don't treat God like a vending machine. But oftentimes when we go to prayer, that's what we do. Sometimes God's answer isn't the healing we want, but the strength to carry the cross with love and hope. Share a saint's personal story. So St. Therese of Lisieux, I think her feast day was not that long ago. She has quite an amazing story of a lot of suffering in her life. If you read the life of just about any saint, they all had a lot of suffering in their life. You could talk about JP2 when he was dying of Parkinson's, and how he held on to the end, just such a witness. I'm just thinking of modern saints. Padre Pio had a lot of suffering, physical suffering with the stigmata. That's just modern saint you could think of that you could refer to. A lot of psychological suffering, because a lot of people are psychologically suffering, right? Some prompts. Did the catechists first show empathy and not just talk about theology? See, that's our as a teacher, we're programmed to what? To give the what? Give the answer. And I've discovered that over time, when you're talking to people like that, like I told you last time, they don't want the answer. They want to be what? They want to be heard. There will come a time if you what? Hear them well, where you'll be able to give them the what? The answer. And they'll really want to receive it. But if you just give them the answer, you can win an argument and lose a soul. That's the danger of apologetics. You can win an argument and lose a soul in front of you. So you have to ask the Holy Spirit, your guardian angel, to guide you in that conversation, right? Okay? Did they validate Maya's honest questions instead of dismissing them? That's really important. Did they connect suffering to Christ's own suffering? Did they leave space for silence? Okay, remember last time we talked about silence is not really a bad thing sometimes when you're listening. You're letting the person kind of process what they're doing. Same thing can happen in these situations. So all those listening skills I talked about last time, they really come into play when you have these kind of scenarios, right? And when kids are asking these questions, like I said, you don't necessarily have to give them an answer, but you have to have something to give to them, right? That answers that question at some point. Or you missed an opportunity to evangelize. And I'm trying to get people to see, once again, these are spiritual works of mercy. What are you doing? You're instructing the ignorant and you're counseling the doubtful. And this is how you're doing it. And that leads to the kerygma. Is what they're looking for. They just don't what? They don't know it yet. Okay. Next one. Are these helpful? Okay, great. Okay, so Jordan is 17, real smart, right? Active school debate club. Oh, he's a debater. Watch out. Enjoys history and philosophy. Oh, he's got a background in philosophy. Don't want to talk to that kid. Recently started reading special blogs and watching videos online, YouTube, TikTok, whatever, that argues Jesus never really existed. I'm going to address this in my next presentation. That he was only a wise teacher, and following him, his followers turned him into God. Okay, well, I want you to know there are active college professors who teach New Testament studies. A guy, look him up, his name's Bart Ehrman. Okay, C.S. Lewis's book, Mere Christianity, addresses three things. He's either a lunatic, a liar, or a Lord. Okay, so if you, just hear me out. If you accept the historical credibility of the Gospels, in other words, they're eyewitness accounts of Jesus of what? Nazareth. Then his claims, he's one of those three things, okay? He's either a liar, and if he's a liar, he's not a good person or a good teacher. Because liars are not good people. If he's not who he says he is, he's absolutely nuts. He's a what? He's a lunatic. To make the claims he what? Could you imagine if somebody came in this room and told you, you got to love me more than you love your own family and your mom and dad? Don't we see that in Scripture? When to you right now as a Christian, family is very what? Important to you. You would think they're crazy. Especially if they were just saying that without performing any kind of miraculous what? Signs to validate what they're what? Saying, right? Okay, well, if he's not a lunatic or a liar, there's only one other choice. He is who he what? Says he is. Okay, great. Well, this guy takes it a step further and says, well, he's a myth. He didn't really what? Exist. You can't verify the historicity of the Gospels. Guess where you can't find an answer to that objection? In the Bible or in catechetical what? Resources. So that means to answer that objection, you got to go outside of the Bible, outside of catechetical what? Resources, because those all assume he did exist and that his claim is valid. And that the person that's reading that already accepts that. If they don't, once again, no matter how good you articulate it, who cares? That is a reality. His name's Bart Ehrman. Look him up. Want a guy that refutes him and destroys him and his stupid arguments? Brant Petrie, The Case for Jesus. I got into a back and forth with somebody online about this, and I just posted because I don't like doing that. I posted the video of Brant Petrie and said, just watch this. And I said, Bart Ehrman is not the final, voice on this topic, bud. Bye. And I got off the thing. Okay, Jesus doesn't exist. Jesus wasn't divine. Okay, you have to believe it because the Bible says so. Well, if you're sola scriptura and you deny reason and philosophy, that's the only response you have. Okay, once again, what are Protestants' belief system based on? Bible what? Alone. When the Bible contradicts reason, we have to accept the Bible because God is a nominalist. Oh, what's that? That's a philosophy from William Ockham. That we can't know things for certain outside of us are real. So we're projecting onto a tree that that's a tree. We can't know by the nature of the tree itself that it's a what? A tree. He's a heretic. Defensive. Don't listen to the internet. That's all lies. Oh, there's a lot of truth to that. Jesus is God, end of story. This is dismissive, right? Stop questioning what the church has taught for over 2,000 years. And how many times do you find people saying this kind of stuff to people? It's not a good what? Response, okay? Okay, affirm the curiosity. Hey, Jordan, those are really important what? Questions. Lots of people wrestle with them, and I'm glad you're bringing them up here. Point 2, point to the historical evidence, which is what I'll do for you in the next presentation I'm going to make, because I was a historian and a civics teacher long before I ever taught what? Theology. My degree is in that. Okay, we all have a degree. Oh, that's what my degree is in. Okay, that. All right? Sorry. Because I don't think degrees today's day and age make that much of a difference. Then a piece of paper doesn't say anything about what you can and what can't do. Historians and even non-Christian ones agree Jesus was a real person. Writers like Tacitus and Josephus, I'll get into who they are. They weren't Christians, but they, in the same time period, validated his existence and his crucifixion death under Pontius what? Pilate. So that validates the historicity of the account you're seeing in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John concerning the death of Jesus on the cross. Didn't say resurrection, it said death. There's other evidence for that. Okay? The idea that he's only myth doesn't hold up with serious historians. No, it doesn't. A legend, that's Bart Ehrman. Legends usually take centuries to form, but the Gospels were written within a generation of his life while eyewitnesses were still alive. They're closer to history than a myth. Okay, and we can point to that. We can date when the Gospels were written. And in fact, I don't think a lot of people know this, but the Gospel accounts are actually, we can validate that they were written by the original authors more easily than we can that Homer wrote the Iliad or the Odyssey, yet nobody ever questions whether Homer wrote the Iliad or Odyssey. But there's more evidence that the Gospels are more reliable than that. Okay, that's Enlightenment narrative projected onto history to denigrate Christianity. And it happens in history classrooms, in high schools and colleges all across this what? Country. Every day. And the kids coming into your classes, that's what they're hearing in what? In school. So you got to be able to respond to that. I did. They didn't like my class because I showed how dumb those what arguments are. Okay. Speak to his divinity. People at the time didn't die for myths. Okay, and I mean, we can talk more about this. The apostles saw Jesus risen, were willing to die for what they experienced. That doesn't prove everything, but it shows it was real to them. I have a better argument than that. It's a poor one. Bridge to faith and reason. Faith doesn't mean ignoring history. No, actually, history can validate things of faith. It means taking the evidence, archaeological evidence, the testimony of eyewitnesses, the lived experience of billions of Christians, and trusting that God revealed himself through the person of Jesus of Nazareth. Okay, lots of ways to unpack that. Okay, I'm going to give you some tools to be able to do that, or at least some references and resources to give to kids that can unpack that for them. Last one. Alexis is 16. She's active on social media where conversations about gender identity, inclusion, and love is love are common. She has a close friend at school who identifies as transgender. This probably is happening. I know it's already happening in some parishes. Alexis is thoughtful, not combative, but she is genuinely confused at what she sees as contradictions between Catholic teaching and the cultural message of acceptance. Okay, what's the cultural message of acceptance? It's the ultimate secular virtue. It's tolerance. And those who scream tolerance the loudest are tolerant until they get in power, and then the only intolerance still tolerated is the intolerance of authentic Christianity. And that's what we're living in right now. Personality, kind. Oh, by the way, tolerance is not a cardinal what? Virtue. And Jesus, if you read the Gospels really carefully, at times was very inward, God bless you, intolerant. What was he intolerant of? Error. No, just error in general, like wrong teaching, yes. Okay. Kind, empathetic, doesn't like conflict, wants everyone to feel safe and loved. During the confirmation class, discussions about Christian morality and dignity, Alexis raises her hand. She asked a good question. My best friend is trans, and everyone online says we should support people being who they feel they are. Oh, there's that word, huh? Feel. Isn't love just love? Shouldn't Christians just accept everyone who they are? Now, on the surface, that sounds like a pretty strong argument, right? Got a lot of philosophical what? Holes in it. Why does the church care so much about gender? Doesn't God want people to be happy? Say, okay, so if you're made for so I'm going to ask, this is a random question just to make a point. So if you asked me to hang a picture in your house and I went in and said, okay, great, give me a nail and a wrench. You'd look at me like I'm what? Crazy. Why? Because does a wrench help you nail a nail in the wall? Okay.
Just saying. I've done it before.
I get it. But under all circumstances where you do have a hammer, wouldn't you look at somebody and say, why didn't you ask me for the wood? Okay. Why is your mind immediately saying that? Because your mind immediately knows that the hammer, by its very design and its final purpose based on its design, is to actually put a nail into something. That's its purpose based on the way it's designed. And it makes absolutely no what? Sense to use a wrench to do that, because a wrench is meant to tighten a valve or something, right? Okay. Well, things outside of us have designs, and they're designed for a purpose. Well, if your body has a design, and it does, this is TOB, it's designed for a purpose. And if you act contrary to your very design and your very nature of your body and your maleness and your femaleness, you're never going to be happy because you can't be fulfilled because you weren't designed to do things that way. I thought you wanted to be what? Happy.
Is that how you would explain it?
That would be the start. Then unpack that with some of the beautiful teaching from JP2, right? And theology of the what? The body. That's why it's the language that answers these crazy objections, okay? And I'll make it very, very transparent for them. Do you know the only organ in your body that doesn't serve its purpose on its own is your reproductive organ? Because you're designed to be in union with somebody else, and its specific purpose is not pleasure, it's procreation. Okay? But we have reduced it because we have a reductionist view of sex. An animalistic view of what? Sex. It's us reducing it to that, not what? Not God. And I want to justify my bad what? Behavior with my bad philosophy about life. Okay, so don't be dismissive. That's just wrong. Don't bring it up. Or hostile. The church is against that in the story. I don't think anybody would do that. God made them male and female. That's it. No discussion. Okay, well, unpack that. Okay? You're made for communion, right? You're an icon of the Trinity. And being in communion doesn't necessarily mean being in physical communion. It means being in communion with another person, offering the gift of your friendship to somebody what? Else. In your whole person. That's making a gift of what? Yourself. And then you're receiving the gift of them offering their whole self back to you and their friendship to you. Okay? This isn't the time or place to talk about that. Yeah, it is. It's actually the best place to talk about it. Okay. Alexis, thank you for bringing this up. It shows how much you care about your friend, and that's really important. Clarify Christian love. Okay, yeah, I didn't do this earlier, but I do this in my talk when I talk about my son. One of the most powerful parts of the testimony is when I break down this idea of, we have this really idea of human love, right? And it's beautiful. It is. We love our kids. We love our spouses. We love our friends, platonic friends. And we love, we love in amazing ways as humans, but our love is imperfect. And God wants us to love in a deeper way than that. And, I want people to be happy. What do you want? You want their temporal happiness or their eternal happiness? You want to be happy for 10 minutes or you want to be happy forever? Jesus is asking us to love and says, hey, I'm going to love you forever. Love is patient, love is kind, it's not rude, it's not pompous, it's not jealous, right? Doesn't brood over injury or rejoice in wrongdoing. It rejoices in what? Truth. Believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things, bears all things. That love didn't fail on Calvary and it won't love now. Loving people is willing their good. Willing their good sometimes means they're going to be temporarily unhappy with what I have to what? To say. And if I deny the doctrine, we'll go back to what I said earlier, if I deny that truth which God has revealed in and through the person of Jesus Christ on the cross, and I say I'm his disciple, I'm lying to him. I'm not his disciple. In fact, right now I'm more worried about hurting that person's feelings than I am about shaming Jesus. Because when I lie about what he revealed, I'm turning my back to him. Okay? If we can't be duplicitous. We can't say we love our Lord and not want to speak boldly about what's true about him because it might cost us something. Guess what? Being a disciple costs something, but you gain everything. Church is teaching with compassion. The church teaches that our bodies are gifts from God, TOB, not mistakes. God created us male and female in our identity as his sons and daughters. You really unpack original man, you're going to see that. That's the first part of that teaching. And the one that's most commonly used today in most places in Catholic circles. When people struggle with that, the church calls us to walk with them, not reject them. So, hey, I'm going to suffer with you. That's what compassion means. Not to take away your what? Suffering, but to walk in your suffering with you. The root word of compassion means to suffer with. Reconnect to Jesus' example. Jesus loved everyone he met, but he also always invited people to something greater. And I could list a million places from the gospel where that happens. So I thought these scenarios and just kind of walking through them with you might be helpful. If you get kids asking, when you're doing junior high confirmation classes and you're going to be, having kids getting confirmed and they're starting to come across these things, some of these things might come what? Up, especially when the median age for people living, like they leave the faith intellectually is at 13, right? So that's about the age where we're going to be what? Confirming them. No, it's like, okay, so let me clarify. Like they're still going to church every Sunday with their parents. They're still sitting in the pews, but they checked out a long time ago. And then when they get to be 21, 22, and they don't have to listen to their parents anymore because they're full-fledged adults, they just quit going to what? Church.